Not much of either. I mean, yeah, this is that time of year where we're trying to gather as much info leading up to the draft as we can, just to ideally see which players we could be looking at come draft night. And I'd say this year, probably more than any year, most of the people that we're talking to are in the same boat as we are, as it's wide open. Like, the range of players is about as wide as I can ever remember. And so that really makes things difficult to try to project which guys we can safely cross off the list who could get to 19. And so there's an added level of kind of uncertainty that I'd say isn't common for this close to the draft.
Did that create you guys issues for you guys in getting guys in, to bring in more than usual, fewer than usual? How did it impact that?
It made things a little tougher, I'd say. We still got in a lot of players, but I think that uncertainty from the agent's perspective was they're catching interest from a big group of the draft. Where we fell on that spectrum is kind of up for debate between our point of view and the agent's point of view. So I'd say there was definitely some decisions made on their part to prioritize some other teams that they felt was maybe in the more realistic range for guys that, come draft night, it might end up being that our point of view was a little more realistic, and hopefully we could have got them in, but it is what it is.
You wouldn't necessarily have to take your guy that you brought in, right?
No. I mean, and I don't think we would ever rule somebody out that we didn't get in. I think there's an understanding, I think, on both sides that it's a jigsaw puzzle that you do your best to fit in a schedule of workouts, and they've got 30 teams calling them to try to fit it in as well. So I don't think you ever hold it against an agent or especially a player that they didn't come and visit us, so we're not going to take them because of that. It makes things a little easier and better for us when we do get them in, because not only how the workout goes, but all the touch points of getting to know them and the time that we spend with them, the time they get in the city, it really adds a level of comfort with a player. But yeah, it's by no means is whether a guy got here during the pre-draft day like a prerequisite to drafting him.
How many guys have you had in who is comparable to the last year?
I don't know exact numbers. I would say it's probably pretty comparable to any other year where we had multiple picks. I think that the ranges that we're in were good for getting in a wide group of players that are kind of both tiers, if you would, like of borderline lottery guys to, borderline first round guys. And so there's a big group of players that fall in that category. And I'd say within those constraints, like I think we got in a decent amount that I would compare to any other year.
Sorry, go. You guys are in the unique position this year of having whatever ends up being 20, 21 hours on the clock before 31. What are, in your view, obviously not having done this before, or anyone having done this before, what do you think are the pros and cons of having that much time to make a pick?
It's going to be interesting. I think everyone is kind of learning as we go on how to approach that. I'd say that we're definitely, we're preparing for the phones being busy leading into that pick, because as we all know, there's always players that unexpectedly fall to the second round. Who those are and where they're, there's teams that like those guys inevitably. How many teams those are and they call to try to get to 31, because it's essentially the first pick the next day. So I think we're preparing for what that board looks like on day 2. It could lead to maybe some more calls than what would normally be the case on a single day draft. I would say there is an element too, though, that in the heat of the moment on a single day draft, when that shift from first round to second round, the heat of the moment leads to a little more like frantic decision making and a little more like caught in the moment, that maybe those offers, they maybe get a little out of control sometimes, because you just get caught up in the moment. Whereas now teams will have a chance to sleep on it and think about it. It's going to be a more measured discussion, I think. but there could be more teams that come to the table and with that pick in mind. But at the same time, like, we also get an extra, whatever you said, 20 hours to like sleep on it and think about the players themselves on the board, to where, I mean, I think we're leaning towards, of course, keeping the pick unless, something comes up. But it's like we're approaching it as if we plan to take that pick, and, we'll see what the board looks like, and we can sleep on it and really have meetings the whole morning and rethink the group of players that we're looking at as if we're like kind of restarting the draft process.
How much weight are you putting into a pick that potentially has a lot of potential, but they're kind of rough, need a bit more development, versus a guy that maybe is a little bit more polished, potentially like a fourth-year player, but maybe the ceiling might not be as high or as athletic, et cetera, et cetera? How much weight do you put into balancing both of those?
I think it's all special circumstances, like to each player comparison. I don't think we ever put more weight on a development player versus a finished product. I think that the NBA is kind of, I should say maybe the NBA draft is going towards just having more of these finished, I hate to call them finished products, but like more seasoned players, just because of the landscape of the NCAA. More guys are going to start staying a little longer because of the NIL rules, and it's just a part of it. And so we just get an added level of evaluation on these guys, that I think that it's it's a sense of who can come in and help us at some point, whether it's this next year or whether it's 2 or 3 years down the road. The goal is to have someone that can actually impact our games. I think we're at the stage of our basketball team cycle to where, we can give players runways to try to get to that point, and it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that can come in and play right away. And I would say that we've always been a team to worry more about the bigger picture of what a guy could do for us down the road. And that's on any level. They don't have to be like all-star potential as much as just like, how can a guy fit in and play for us? We have a long track record of taking guys they just know how to play, regardless of what their upside is. And then hopefully, like, all of these guys have some untapped development potential, that even if the ceilings might not be as high as some of like the really young, enticing guys, there is still some development upside.
Has the volatility of this draft created more trade talk in 19, like moving 19 to 13, 19 to 25, because of that huge?
No, I wouldn't say there's any extra sense of that. Probably just more chatter than everything, of people just trying to get a feel for maybe which picks are available. Because I do think there is a level of, once the draft begins and certain players end up staying on the board that maybe was unexpected, there could be a little more volatility at that point, when certain players that, maybe drop to a certain level that isn't normal or isn't usual in terms of, who's projected to be the top guys. There's usually only like 1 or 2 guys that slip, but maybe this year it could be a little wider in terms of the number of guys that kind of shift around. And then, yeah, maybe at that point there could be some action to people to try to move up into a spot to get somebody. But at this point, I wouldn't say it's been anything abnormal.
You touched on this a bit ago, but this is the first time you've really gone into the draft process with the core, 25 and under, except for Yak. How does that change the process for you guys, if at all?
Not really at all, honestly. Like, we try to approach the draft the same way every year, to where we evaluate the group of players that we have, and I should say the group of players that are available to draft, and then we try to stack up within our group who the best players are for us and the way we play and what we're looking for, regardless of what's going on the main team, because it's all of that can change in a blink of an eye. And so we just want to make sure that we're selecting the players that we think, regardless of what happens when all the dust settles and we're walking into summer league, like they're guys that we're comfortable with that can grow with us long term.
With that said, Scotty's obviously a guy that you're building around. When you're going through this process, how much do you consider him and his skill set and projecting fit for a lot of these prospects?
I think that it's I mean, I think there's definitely a level of it because anytime you're building around a core of guys, like we have a group of young guys that we do have in mind building, and like there's holes that we do need to address, but I don't know if the draft is necessarily like we've never been a team that wants to use the draft to fill those holes. It's more of like we know what we're going to need long term, and whether that's a combination of draft and free agency, we know where we need to get to, and those discussions happen, but it's never we have to pinpoint a certain position or a certain type of player to fit with where building around any of our young guys makes sense via the draft. It's more of best player available is usually how we lean in the draft, because it's at the end of the day, if by mid-season next year things have changed a lot, it's like if we still think we have the best player or we took the best player at the time, like we'll be happy with it.
And, Rich Paul made kind of unusual comments last week regarding Bronny, and one of the teams that you kind of mentioned was the Raptors. And, I'm only asking because Rich put it out there. I mean, is Bronny James the guy you look at with one of your picks?
I mean, I think all these players are guys that we're looking at. I mean, he's in the mix, like I wouldn't say it'd be a disservice to us if I told you like anything more strongly than anyone else, but I think I would say that, yeah, like every player on the board we're looking long and hard at, and I wouldn't say that we've ruled anybody out at any of our picks. So that's as much as I'd probably say on that.
How would you notice this second tax apron, second round draft pick exception, changes to the CBA impacting conversations you've had recently as it pertains to the draft?
I wouldn't say a ton, honestly. Like I think the ability to sign second round. I mean, having 31, it's obviously it's a marquee second round pick, and so I do think there's probably a level of your ability to sign those guys without tapping into the mid level or whatever the processes were in the past to be able to sign a guy. Being able to now have that second round exception, that is probably the main part that's changed in terms of the value of being able to roster these guys without worrying too much about the other mechanisms. But in terms of like, other teams maneuvering to do anything to avoid aprons or whatever, like I haven't really noticed a ton of difference than in years past.
When you look at a player like Zach Levine, you guys obviously worked out, but there's been some sort of polarizing topic on how some of the skills could kind of translate over. How do you delineate or find those indicators of figuring out what you think would translate over and know what works at the pro level?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a conversation for way more than just ED too. Like it's like all these guys, they're coming from a different, almost like a different sport, like college basketball, international pro basketball. Like it's not the NBA with the way that they play. There's different shot clocks, different 3-point distance, like all of the things that go into what makes players really good at that level is different in the NBA. And it's honestly, that's one of the biggest parts of our evaluation process is what translates and what doesn't. And I would say that a lot of our internal debates in the days leading up to the draft are rehashing conversations that we've been having for the last couple months on just going over and over and over of what translates, what doesn't, why do we think certain things will, why do we think certain things won't for one player versus another player. There's a lot of these side-by-side discussions as we're trying to stack out our order, and translating skills is a big part of that. But I mean, I wouldn't say anything with him particularly is anything different than other players. I think there's players across the board that have equal number of questions on if things can translate or not.
Has that changed league-wide? Like, is there any sort of trend that might be happening over the last couple of years that maybe you've noticed that teams are kind of getting used to?
No, I wouldn't say anything notable in terms of trends. I think like the NBA for the last few years it's been offensively trending and then now maybe it's going to swing back the other way and trend defensively with, some of the adjustments that are being made. But, we have to ideally stay ahead of those trends as opposed to following the trends. Like we've always been a team we just kind of do what we think is best for us. And if it happens to be a bigger trend in the league, like so be it. But if not, but we feel comfortable with what we're doing, then we're just going to do that.
How has this past week or whatever, since the finals ended, you guys can talk to your own free agents and stuff, how has that changed this process heading into the draft, eventually heading into free agency compared to years past?
That's not really my side of things. Like I know Masai and Bobby, they handle the free agent side a lot more. I'm still with my group in the room dealing with the draft. And so I couldn't answer that for them, but I would say from our perspective, it hasn't changed our draft discussions whatsoever.
Who you drafting?
Oh, I haven't read your columns yet, so I gotta take a look to see who our top picks are.